Dr. Andrea McNeely is a first-class human nutrition graduate from the University of Ulster Coleraine and has been appointed as a lecturer in sport and exercise nutrition within the Ulster Sports Academy at the University of Ulster Jordanstown. Andrea continues to be actively involved in nutrition education and acts as a consultant sport and exercise nutritionist for many sports teams and clubs throughout Northern Ireland.
Whenever we think about training for a marathon event, it is important not only to think about the psychological aspects as well as your training, but nutrition also plays a composite part of this. When we think about the scientific evidence, we know that diet significantly influences athletic performance, and an adequate diet in terms of quantity and quality before, during and after training and competition can help maximise your performance. And this comes from the International Olympic Committee Consensus Statement on Sport and Exercise Nutrition. If we then think about the aims of sport and exercise nutrition, for a sport and exercise nutritionist working with anybody training to complete the marathon, the main aim is obviously to improve exercise performance and allow you to come in with a good time in the marathon event. So whether that's 3.5 hours, 4 hours or longer, the aim is to ensure that you have enough energy to perform the exercise. We also want to decrease recovery time from strenuous events. But as well as that, over the course of your marathon training, we want to try and prevent exercise injuries due to fatigue. If you don't have the correct fuel required during high intensity exercise, then you are at greater risk of becoming fatigued and injured. There's also an element of controlling your weight and body composition. This does generally vary between sports. If we think about training for the marathon event, which is coming up shortly in Belfast, the two main things that I want to focus on in this presentation are firstly, how can you increase your carbohydrate intake? As we know that carbohydrate is a main fuel that is used during exercise of high intensity. So we will look at strategies to increase carbohydrate intake both before, during and after exercise. We will also look at monitoring fluid intake and strategies to try and prevent dehydration, which have a direct knock-on effect on your exercise performance. Ultimately, if you can do both of these in combination, it will be a recipe for success. If we then think about what type of diet you should be following during your marathon training, if we think about the average person in this country, we would estimate that 40% of total energy intake comes from carbohydrate, 40% comes from fat, and unfortunately for us, it does tend to come from saturated fat, which is unhealthy when we think about not only athletic performance, but also with regards to cardiovascular disease risk. And 20% then comes from protein. Ideally, anybody starting to train for the marathon should have a healthy dietary intake to begin with. So in this case, 50% of total energy intake should come from carbohydrate, slightly less at 30% of total energy intake coming from fat, which should be a combination of unsaturated with low levels of saturated fats in the diet, and 20% protein. If we then think about somebody who's undertaking regular high-intensity training for the marathon, the energy requirements from carbohydrate increases to 60% of total energy intake coming from carbohydrate foods, 25% from fat, which again should be a balance between unsaturated and saturated fatty acids, and 15% coming from protein. If we then put this into perspective with regards to how much that equates to on a daily basis, the average sedentary female will require 2,000 kilocalories per day. Males get a slightly larger requirement at 2,500 kilocalories per day. Depending on the type of sport and the level and duration of intensity of exercise, this will vary between 2,300 to 6,000 kilocalories per day. So it is important to make sure that your energy intake is high enough to maintain your performance during the marathon training, given that it is a high demanding role that you're going to be participating in. So where do we get the energy from? Obviously we get our energy from our food intake on a daily basis. If we think about the actual composition of food, we know that carbohydrate foods, such as pasta, potatoes and rice, supply us with 4 kilocalories per gram. Protein, found in meat and also some plant products, also supplies us with 4 kilocalories per gram. However, the role of carbohydrate and protein in the diet are distinctly different. Protein will be used for the growth and repair of tissues in the body, whereas we know that carbohydrate can be used as a source of energy. Fat, both saturated fat and unsaturated fat, such as butter or margarine, supplies us with around 9 kilocalories per gram. However, it is important to note that for high intensity exercise, fat will generally not be used as a source of energy. Alcohol, found in wines, beers, spirits, etc., supplies us with 7 kilocalories per gram. However, it is important to note that alcohol, as well as being considered to be empty calories, can dehydrate the body, and this will have a direct effect on athletic performance. It is therefore recommended that during marathon training, you exclude alcohol from the diet, and the majority of runners and athletes will be on an alcohol ban during marathon preparation.